Well, good afternoon. This is Mike Tillotson at Old Grove Cemetery.
And you must do this a lot.
My husband, Dwayne, began these tours 12-ish years ago. He passed away in 2014, and we have continued on. Mary holds the record for having been on every single cemetery walk. So that's why she gets to be the associate here. A couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. If you have trouble hearing me with the wind noise, make sure you let me know. Make sure that you're facing me when I'm talking about a dead person, so that we have the best hearing range. You can stay close to me. Please do not leave trash or litter. If you get tired and you want to sit on a monument while I'm talking about someone, that is perfectly acceptable to the Kizakowskis, the people that run the cemetery. They have cleared that as an okay thing. Watch your step. We haven't had a huge acorn fall yet this year, but there are acorns and twigs. There are also monuments in the grave markers in the ground that stick up. Make sure you're watching where you're going. We don't want to have anybody face planted on the tour today. There are no bathrooms, so if you need to use the bathroom, Burger King is the closest place to find a bathroom. And so any questions for me before we begin? I heard some of you have been on cemetery walks before, so that's great. Michigan became a state in 1838-ish. For a territory to become a state, it had to document that it had a certain number of people in permanent residence in the state. So Michigan became a state due to westward expansion. This was in a time before huge conflicts around the United States, the Civil War. So people were moving west because things were getting a little crowded on the East Coast. People wanted to have their own space. They didn't want to inherit a piece of their father's land. So people were beginning, this migration going west was starting. Manistee developed as a community, originally as a Native American community, and evolved then due to shipping and trapping of furs. Shipping started to come in to move the furs. Lumbering started because we had huge native growth forests. And about 1865, we had been immersed in the Civil War. The community had grown. There was a growing population of entrepreneurs, men who were coming in to do lumbering, who were not, I want to say, not exactly strictly law-abiding. They were coming in and kind of doing their own thing. Also, at the end of the Civil War, the Homestead Act went into effect. The Homestead Act was a congressional benefit to Union soldiers if they moved west and set claim on 5 acres. If they managed the 5 acres and farmed it, took ownership of it, at the end of 5 years it was theirs. And a lot of people moved west to take advantage of that. And you'll see some of that effect in this cemetery. But in 1865, there was a growing problem. People didn't have an organized place to bury people. The usual place to bury someone before that time, if you had a yard, you could bury them in your yard. If you had somebody who had a field, you might set up a little plot in the corner of a field. It was usually a family plot, but you could do that, and we do still have some family plots in the corner of cornfields in this area. If you wanted to be really sneaky, you could find some vacant piece of land and bury your dead beloved one in that land and hope that you never were caught. And for a time that it was happening here. There was a big sand dune over near the First Street beach called Creeping Joe. And it was privately owned land, but it was vacant land. So people would go dig a hole and park their person there and hope they wouldn't. This was kind of the thing to do, kind of an accepted procedure. Until the man who owned the land decided he wanted to sell it. And he didn't want to sell it with extra residents. So he advertised for people to please come and take their loved ones away. At the same time, Creeping Joe was creeping. And as Creeping Joe moved, things were being left behind. So we had this problem of coffins and dead bodies kind of just showing up. So it became something of an issue that Manistee have a non-denominational cemetery in which people could legally and lawfully bury their dearly departed. In 1865, Lakeview Cemetery was born. It was on 62 acres. 10 of them were platted as the cemetery, and that's this part of the Lakeview plot, I guess we'll call it. People were required to formally request a burial plot. They were required to pay a fee in order to bury their loved one here. But some control was beginning to be established over the process of burials in Manistee. This went on for some time until in 1883, a group of wealthy businessmen formed an association to really make this cemetery profitable, to make it self-sustaining, to make it a wonderful place for them to be buried in when they died. And they renamed the cemetery Oak Grove Cemetery. So it was the Oak Grove Cemetery Association. It was at that point that really good record keeping began. Who was buried here, when they were buried, where they were buried. What areas of the cemetery were identified with markers so that you could direct people to a space. This section up on that hill on your side of the street and this section behind me are the oldest sections in the cemetery. And if you look at that hill, you might say to yourself, wow, there aren't very many people buried there. There was a wave of vandalism in the 1960s, and because these two sections of the cemetery were closest to the road, it was easiest for gangs to come in here and desecrate grave markers. And a lot of damage happened, especially on that hill. At the same time, the county had taken over all those men who formed the Oak Grove Cemetery Association. Most of them died and were buried here. And there wasn't anybody coming in to take their place. So the county took over the administration of the cemetery, and the county was not doing a very good job of taking care of it. In 1971, Ludwig Kiesikowski purchased the cemetery from the county. He purchased this whole acreage of land from the county for $1. And rather than try and restore all of the broken monuments and put all those pieces together, they just cleaned it all up, took all those pieces away, and have left that to be a place. There are a lot of people buried there, but not that we can readily see identified by grave markers. So this was 62 acres of land that Ludwig acquired for $1. You can imagine the county's chagrin when they discovered oil on the property. and the county was not able to get it back. And the Kiesikowskis, it's Eric Kiesikowski, who is now the administrator for the property. And as you can see, they do a really nice job of maintaining the property. They keep it clean, they keep it up to date. It's a good place. It's a good place to be there, and it's a good place to be. It is also important to remember that it is non-denominational. We have a Lutheran cemetery and we have a Catholic cemetery on the south side of town, but this is non-denominational. It doesn't matter what faith community, or if you even belong to a faith community, you may be buried here.
And Eric is Letty's grandson.
Yes.
His son ran it for a long time, and now his son is running it.
So did they keep all the oil rights?
They did.
So they were very rich?
Yeah.
That's why they take
And to their credit, they plowed a lot of that back into this. So I'm going to talk about the kind of the theme for this walk this year is legal issues. People who are buried here who have had legal issues or have had a legal challenge. But we always start with this mausoleum. There are 3 mausoleums here on the property. We always talk about the 3 mausoleums because they're big. People see them and they wonder who the heck could afford to have one of those. So this one is rather unusual since it is set into the ground, and it is the oldest mausoleum in the property. And this belongs to the Fowler family, and Smith W. Fowler, who was born in 1829 and died in 1894, is the person I want to talk about here. In 1851, he was admitted to the bar. He comes from New York. 1851, he was admitted to the bar and he moved to Michigan, part of that westward group of people moving. He's noted for helping to organize the Republican Party in Jackson, Michigan. He was the chairman of the Republican Party. He actually attended the Republican convention in Chicago that nominated Abraham Lincoln as their candidate for presidency. So he has quite a background with actually starting with national things. In 1861, within 9 days of the attack on Fort Sumter, he resigned all of his jobs. He quit everything and raised a company, the 6th Michigan Infantry, and went to Washington, D.C. They were among the first group of infantry people to report to Abraham Lincoln in Washington, D.C. to say, we're ready for duty. We're ready to go. He served 3 years in the military. He served primarily in the southern United States. He caught malaria. He had a whole bunch of ailments, and he had to resign after 3 years of service. He came back to Manistee, and in 1867 he opened a law office, and he purchased what was then the only newspaper in town, the Manistee Gazette. He changed the name to the Manistee Times. In 1871, he sold the paper to Richard Hoffman, and Smith W. Fowler held the mortgage. Mr. Hoffman defaulted on the mortgage, and Smith Fowler took the paper back. Mr. Hoffman was so upset, somehow he managed to acquire another press, and he began publishing the Manistee Times, his version of the Manistee Times. So for a year and a half, there were 2 newspapers called the Manistee Times, 2 newspapers with completely different editorial policies, 2 newspapers that hit the stands at the same time. So they never had to go to court to resolve it. Smith Fowler purchased yet another newspaper. He purchased the Manistee Standard and combined the 2 names. So then it was the Manistee Times and Standard, and things were identifiable, readily identifiable. Then, Smith W. Fowler's wife, Fanny Frances Fowler, was a big activist for women's suffrage. And Smith W. Fowler granted her column space in his papers. This was well before the campaign started for the 18th Amendment, but she was at the forefront of the movement. This is very unusual that she would be allowed to have her own column under her own name in a published newspaper. Now, you'll notice that the date on the mausoleum is 1886. Mr. Fowler actually went to California for his health, and unfortunately in 1894 he died there. This is the date that the mausoleum was constructed, not a death date. They brought him home from California. He's interred here. This mausoleum did suffer damage in that wave of vandalism. They bricked up the inside of the mausoleum, inside the door. It's bricked up, but not before the Manistee County Historical Society was able to go in and do a census of the occupants and record those, and then it was bricked up on the inside. So this is Smith W. Fowler. One of the ladies commented on the tree trunk. This is a Tomlinson memorial. And as I said, there was one insurance company that gave their insurees tree trunk monuments. This one was given by a family for our dear mother. They are very complicated memorials to construct. They're labor intensive, so you really don't see a lot of them. As we walk through the cemetery, you're going to see a lot of monuments that have this style, this kind of rough-hewn square block style. I don't know who had the concessions for memorials in Manistee, but this was a very popular style of monument. The three rings are eternity rings, so that is a funeral symbol that appears on stones, and there is a whole language of funeral symbols. I'll try and point some of those out as we go through. So now we're going to walk a stretch. If you've been on this walk, I usually go that way. Fads go in and out, just like in everything, but the clasp pans, there are several of those in the cemetery, and they are all in the flat stones. And they have remodeled it and reconstructed it into a columbarium. Now taking reservations, call that phone number. And it is a keypad entry so that anyone who has a loved one in residence. Charles.
I got a question for you on that tool shed. Do they have urns in there or caskets or what?
They have both.
And what's that? The price of that compared to be out here? Is it cheaper or no idea?
It's perpetual care, so I'm sure that there's a little cost attached to. Like everything, there's a little extra thing.
And it's not cheap to be buried.
So, Charles H. Daniels, and you'll see this a lot, the big monument will have the family name on it, and then the family members will be buried around the family monument. Sometimes they will have the name, sometimes it will just say mother or father or baby, and so that can leave people wondering who actually is buried. Of establishing a brewery. We'd had a couple of breweries in town, they didn't do well, but he came to establish a big German-style brewery. This is at a time when breweries sold their product in kegs or barrels, and the saloon or the tavern then served from that big container. There were no bottling plants. You didn't sell commercially to out of town. You served to your customers through a middle person in town. He renamed the brewery. It started out as the Manistee Brewing Company, but he did rename it to the C.H. Daniels Brewery. And he managed to survive through a lot of the temperance movement and a lot of prohibition by marketing his product as a health food, a beneficial product that could help your body, that could soothe your soul. And because he was selling locally, people wanted that product, so they bought into that justification. However, it is also reported that he may have put a show of converting his product into soda pop, and by then he had developed a bottling. He had expanded to include a bottling portion of his plant. But he was really still selling beer. But people wanted the product and were willing to put up with the fakery and continue that. After Prohibition, though, in order to begin formally reestablishing themselves as a beer brewery, they had to obtain some licensing, and they started up the brewery before they got the licensing. Then they had to shut they had to shut it all down and wait for the licensing. This is not the first time that there was controversy over this brewery. Not the product, but the brewery itself. They continued to suffer financially after Prohibition and the Depression, and they finally went out of business just before World War II. Now, Mr. Daniels had purchased the land that the brewery was on from Louis Sands. So we're going to talk about the controversy, the bigger controversy, in a minute. The brewery was located on the southeast corner of the area of land that's at the US 31 bridge, about where the American Legion is now, for those of you who are familiar with town. And so that's C.H. Daniels. Tom Daniels still lives in town. He's writing a huge family history of the Daniels family and the brewing company. He was on a tour last year. I asked if anybody had some dead people I should talk about, and he gave me practically a whole book about his family. So I could spend a lot of time here, but Charles is the one that is the controversy is running off of.
Is this the family that Bob Daniels is in?
Yeah.
Part of?
Yeah.
Senior Center.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to move up. Product from his own sawmill to other places around the Great Lakes. He owned extensive property in Manitoba, Canada. I would just like to keep you focused on the time. There were no real roads into Manistee at that time. There were some rail lines in, but they were primarily freight lines, not passenger lines. Shipping was the way to get your product out and in. Shipping is how you got your news. It may be new news to Manistee, but it might be weeks or months old from the original news source. So even though the population is growing, wealth is growing, immigrants are coming from all other parts of the world, we're still really rather isolated from the rest of the world. So it's important to keep that in mind. Lumberjacks had a hard life. Lumberjacks worked through the winter. They worked 6 days a week during all the daylight hours. As long as it was daylight, a lumberjack was out in the woods doing his thing. No her thing, his thing. On the seventh day, they did housekeeping chores, they took care of tools, and if they had a little extra time, they drank. Their meals were pretty standard. Beans, pork and beans, more beans than pork, cornbread, maybe some molasses, not much variety. they might earn $3,000, $4,000 for a winter's work. And that was a significant amount of money. There were no taxes then, so whatever they earned was all theirs. Their buck was a whole buck, and it was their buck. Now, Mr. Sands had purchased a lot of property in Manistee, and one of the properties that he owned was the piece of land that he sold to Mr. Daniels for his brewery. Of course, a brewery needs water. And Mr. Daniels purchased this land on the banks of the Manistee River and began using Manistee River water in his brewing process. Louis Sands said, "You can't do that. I only sold you the land. I didn't sell you the rights to the water." That's called riparian rights. I didn't sell you those rights. Well, it went to court. It became a big brouhaha. Mr. Daniels won out and was able to continue using Manistee River water as part of his production process. So he was kind of a skinflint, looking out for the big buck, but he wasn't alone. There were a lot of people, a lot of men in town who were doing the same thing. Mr. Sands died in 1905. I can read the marker upside down. He died in 1905. So you can see he was pretty prolific with his family. They're kind of all around him. So this is Louis Sands. Now we're going up to that mausoleum. This is the Canoes Mausoleum, and it is the home of Virginia, or as she was more affectionately known, Jane Canoes. Jane was born in 1876. She was a member of a family that was not tremendously wealthy, but I would say was middle class, upper middle class. She was a school teacher. She lived in a house which is still in Manistee, which sometimes is rather unusual. But the people I talk about, their big mansions are all gone. But Jane's home was located at 461 5th Street, and it is still there. It's just kind of a standard, kind of largish family dwelling, a frame house. Jane married a gentleman who was a member of the Goodrich Company, not Goodrich Tire, but a different Goodrich Company. They married in 1898, and it was a huge wedding. It had big newspaper coverage because she was kind of the favorite daughter of the community. She was well liked, she was respected because she was a school teacher. She impacted many families. But as soon as she married Harry Canoes, she couldn't teach anymore. This is a mystery to me. Women could teach school until they got married, and after that, they couldn't work outside the home. That was it. They're done. She moved with Harry all throughout the Midwest, finally settling in the Detroit area. They had a daughter, and then Manistee was electrified to be notified that Jane had died as a result of a botched surgery. She was 36 years old. You remember the Manistee and Northeastern Railroad? They started in Onekama and built towards Manistee because the rights of the land on the south side of the river had not been cleared, had not been legally acquired. There was a lot of suspicion around the new railroad, and I have to think a lot of that suspicion was directly related to the fact that Ed Buckley had his hand in it. People knew about Ed Buckley. People knew what kind of a guy he was. The Buckley and his partners had the land rights from Onekama up to the river. So we're coming north from Onekama, south to the river. The proposed road on the south side of the river was parallel to and immediately adjacent to Jones Street and passed right by a saloon and hotel named the Sorensen House. They claimed that the Manistee and Northeastern Railroad had not secured the right-of-way past their establishment. So we're talking about one block, basically one block. And in a protest, John and Cecilia, the work had started from the river, and they're about a block into the south side of the river. They were laying rail and tie. John and Cecilia went and sat in the path of the construction. They staged a two-person sit-down strike. And Cecilia had bedding brought out to her so that she could sleep on the rails on a night in protest. She had a chair and bedding. She remained there all night. The next day, the railroad swore out a warrant for her arrest, charging her with malicious obstruction of public railroad property. Eventually, the court acquitted her of the charge, and she was awarded a settlement of $1,500. But again, to just let you know how rife this whole railroad construction was with conflict and legal repercussions all along the way. So these are the Sorensens. And I find it interesting, her name is spelled C-A here, but if when I went online to look her up, it's almost always spelled C-E. So it's like, hey, who's not getting the message here?
Well, the Sorensen family was quite a good-sized family. And there was a Jibabi Sorensen orchard, which was many, many acres at US 31 and M22, which is now the casino.
Oh.
They bought it from Bryce. Bryce bought it from Jibabi Sorensens.
So it isn't Native American owned.
The casino.
The casino.
That land is
That
ancestral.
That is
that
Indian
was a
land.
reservation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It is reservation
Yes.
land.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow.
So this is where I'm going to stop. There are a lot of people to talk about here. We've done so many of these tours that now it's getting kind of difficult for me to decide exactly who I'm going to talk about in any given year, especially when I have wonderful people who, when I ask, is there a family member here that has a story? And I get wonderful stories, and some of those people get plugged into the tours. Mr. Daniels is a direct result of somebody on the tour last year. Cecilia Sorensen is a direct result of another person on the tour last year who had a story to tell about people here. So I do have a tour booklet. It is a tour guide booklet that is different from what in many ways different from what I have walked you through today and who I have talked about today. Those are available by donation, whatever you would like to donate. All the monies collected from these tours and from the booklets is split in half and divided between the Oak Grove Cemetery Flower Fund and the Manistee County Historical Museum. Mary will take you over to those booklets if you're interested, and if at any time you're back and you want to take another walk, they are self-guided. There are specific directions on how to reach any of the grave markers in that tour and information about the people who are in those places. So thank you very much for coming out. We had nice weather. If the rain held off.
You gave a real nice presentation.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And I got a lot of support from the
Well, it's Sunday. 1 o'clock or so. Manistee, the Victorian Port City Fire Station Fire Prevention Open House, October 8, 11 to 3. About 1 o'clock, so we're about halfway through.
Oh,
I got a fireman down here. Tell me who you are and what's going on today.
My name's Heath Darling. I'm the Deputy Fire Chief for the City of Manistee Fire Department. We're here today doing our annual open house to kick off Fire Prevention Week and showing the public some of what we have to offer here in the city for fire service, as well as some games for the kids to participate in. We've got a little obstacle course. The kids can spray a little bit of water here. We've got some treats, some handout materials for fire safety and prevention. Our fire prevention trailer is here for kids to go through and get a little bit more education into fire safety and what to do if they encounter a fire in their home. So that's in a
So
nutshell
what should we
we're doing.
remember then as adults about fire?
As adults, we got to remember that never to let our guard down. We can't take things for granted. Fires continue to happen every day. People are killed by fire every year. We just can't let our guard down. We gotta remember things like changing the batteries in our smoke detectors twice a year. We gotta consider having smoke detectors in all the sleeping areas, keeping doors closed at night when we're sleeping to prevent the spread of fire, and teaching our kids a safe way out of the home, a meeting spot outside, and all the other types of things that we do to avoid injury or cause fire.
What seems to be the leading cause of home fires? What would they say the last 10 years or so?
Well, I would say probably cooking. Cooking is probably one of the leading causes for fires in the home.
Walk off, let something burn, and
Yeah, people they leave something on the stove, or they forget that it's on, or maybe it gets away from them and they don't take the proper steps or precautions to put those fires out, and before you know it, they've spread and they're involving the entire home.
okay, well, we gotta be careful. Anything new about this truck? How old is this truck?
This
Less
truck
than
is 13 years old now.
It looks brand new.
Pardon me?
It looks brand new.
Well, we do our best to keep them looking brand new. They gotta work. They gotta perform for us at a moment's notice. So we put a lot of time and effort into keeping them top notch.
Now, last year I think it was somebody down here told me that most of your job now is rescue.
Yeah, a very large portion, probably 80 to 90% of our job is emergency medical service. Here in the city of Manistee, we do provide advanced life support and transport EMS. So just about any type of emergency outside of the hospital we can handle, as far as stabilizing patients until they get to the hospital for definitive care.
On a personal note, I don't know if you personally were involved or not, but I had a medical emergency. You guys got me to the hospital. I'm still alive, so.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
We did our job.
You did? Yeah, you did. Yeah, gee, you did. Well, thank you.
Scoop up, you want to make sure that thing's really full, okay? I'll make sure I don't pack it down. Then what you want to do, you want to run over to that bucket, right? So you run over here, you pour yours in that bucket, and he'll pour his in this bucket. And whoever fills the bucket first, the most, and weighs it down, puts the fire out.
All right, we'll try and put the fire out.
All right, that sound cool? Okay, here, we gotta get. All right, you want to back. We gotta start at the same time, otherwise it's not a race. Gotta make it fair. Okay, there you go. Ready? Pour in the bucket, right? Go!
Go. There you go.
Okay, hurry up.
There you go. Go get some more. Go get some more. Fill it up.
Come on, we gotta fill it way up.
There you go. There you go. Keep going.
All right.
Mine's almost done.
There you go. Get some more. There you go. Getting close. Both of you are going to get that fire out quick.
Oh! Fire's out.
I just got him.
Hold on just a second.
Fire's out. All right, good job. We'll put your scoops back in the bucket there. Good job.
Here you go.
Oh, Isaac.
Oh. Thank you.
You bet.
A little dog.
Wanna go outside and do another one?
Yeah.
All right.
Here, hold on. What's that?
No, well, yeah.
What's that?
This is Keeler.
Gotta put it in the box. Put it in the chalk box. Okay? Drop it down. Good. Drop down. And we go this way.
Follow firefighter Mark back.
Okay. Awesome. I never seen this before. Right down here. Put it in this. Put it in the box. Set it down. Okay. Come with me. Keep coming. Now we're gonna spray a real hose. Ready? Oh, good job. There, you got it. Yes.
Now the boys' turn.
Got it. Oh, it's wet. How's that? Fix the screen. Oh, good job.
Got it.
I just sprayed at me.
This is Chief Olson, Herb Olson. I knew him. This is Scribs here. I knew him pretty well. He was chief 15 years. Chief Bachman. I remember when he came to, well, I remember when this guy came to town. I remember when he came to town. Now he's retired. Well, there's the sun. 8 o'clock. We're going to call it 8 o'clock. I'm in behind a tree a little bit, so it's not quite so bright. Well, it's a Monday night. I'm at First Street Beach. The classic sidewalk has been picked up, which I wonder why. A lot of old people can't get out there. Probably like to, but this guy called in to work tomorrow. Too tired to come in. Here comes another one. There are 3 of them out there right now. Now we're getting ready to go. So there's 4 out there. Okay, one is going out, so there's 4. Looks like they jump about 5 foot in the air. Ten minutes to 7, the sun came up this morning at 8 o'clock, so we've had 11 hours of sunrise, and that's going to be getting less and less every day. It won't be long, it'll be dark at 5. Then it won't be light until 9. Now that guy went up about 10 foot, I think. It was twice as high as the breakwater. See the ship out here demonstrates the curvature of the earth. It's, I'm guessing, 3 miles out. You see how part of the hull is already beyond the horizon. That was one of the things that Noah looked at when he knew that the world was round. Ship's probably got, who knows, coal, who knows. If you count the seconds, from the time the bow at the pointy end gets to the right there, count the seconds until the stern gets there. If you know how long the ship is, that'll tell you real easy how fast it's going. The ship is about 652 foot long. Real easy way of determining the speed. See the self-unloader on there? Ship is moving right along. It's the only crap I see out there anywhere. Okay, get ready to stop your clock. Now. I'm going to time it this time when the bow gets to the edge of my viewfinder. One, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45 seconds. There's 3 people out there that I can see that are parasailing. They go over pretty fast when they down the thing. Now what? Oh, he just pulls on the string and it lifts him right back up on the board. You probably didn't know how that worked, did you? Okay, neither did I. I didn't know that. This obviously is a man's sport. Again, I don't have any idea what I'm talking about. So don't sue me. Because I don't care. You stay out here long enough, which I might, the green light will start blinking. You still got sun because the lighthouse is being lit. Very low angle. It's very nice after all that work they did on it last year. You'll notice it's pretty interesting that the wind is coming out of the north, but these guys can go any direction they want to.